Hi, Jeff Goldfinger from the STEM Signal, where we help the STEM educated increase their career signal above the workplace noise. Today's episode is actually part 2 of a 3-part series I'm going to do on trust. After posting last week's video, Trust Part 1, I realized there's much more to say about the topic. So in last week's episode, we talked about trust from a philosophical perspective, the linguistic, ontological perspective of how to trust your ears, EARS, engagement, ability, reliability, sincerity. Today, we're going to talk about the spectrum of trust. Now, let's get down to business. Okay, so part 1, the link to it is in the description box, talks about how we can use observable metrics to figure out whether somebody is trustworthy, but more importantly, whether we can prove we are trustworthy. What's the spectrum of trustworthiness, right? So let's draw a line and say that on one end of the spectrum, you trust everything and everybody, all right? And we'll call that being naive. Okay? On the other end of the spectrum, you trust nobody. You trust nothing. We call that being a skeptic. All right, so what are some examples of that? So a few years ago, there was I think it was 2008, a Jim Carrey movie called Yes Man, where he was a bank loan officer, somebody who's normally skeptical, and he went to one of those weekend, self-help sessions, and this guru talked him into just saying yes to everything. Now that became a problem, as you'll see in the beginning part of the movie. I'm not going to give away the whole plot, but obviously if you just say yes to everything, that's going to produce a lot of problems for you, right? Financial problems, right? Look what happened with Bernie Madoff in the US. He cheated a whole ton of people out of their life savings because they naively trusted him too much. On the other end of the spectrum, if you're a skeptic, you're going to miss out on some opportunities you would otherwise benefit from. So Grant Cardone, he's a famous real estate investment manager. He's got something like $4 billion under management right now. He just released an article just a few days ago. This is June 2023. So a few days before, he wrote an article that says, "Quit saving your money." Whoa, I thought that's the common advice everybody gets from their parents and from their colleagues. Well, his point was that's not going to achieve great wealth for you, enough to retire off of. You need to actually invest your money into products that are going to produce a return greater than inflation. And so I won't go into it. I'm not promoting Grant Cardone's work. I'm just saying his point is that people are too skeptical of investment and investment managing, right? You're going to miss out on opportunities. So too naive, you go put your money in the wrong investment. Too skeptical, you don't benefit from investment. So those are the two ends of the spectrum. Okay, so what's in the middle? Well, in the middle, we call this prudence. So what's an example of that? Back in the 1990s, President Ronald Reagan of the US was in negotiations with the then Soviet Union premier about reducing nuclear arms and signing a new nuclear arms treaty. And the skeptics in the US were saying, how could we trust the Soviet Union? This was part of the axis of evil that Ronald Reagan had spoken of just a few years prior. And he said, okay, well, we're going to trust but verify. That was his famous quote from the 90s. I don't know whether it was a speechwriter who wrote it, but his point was, let's be prudent when it comes to this treaty. We'll sign the treaty, we'll trust them, but we'll send over people to actually verify that it's occurring as it should. All right, so those are some real world examples of how you can be too naive, too skeptical, and it's best to be prudent. So then the question is, well, are there times you want to be naive? And are there times you want to be skeptical? So naivete, real world example, I grew up in northern New Jersey in the US. I grew up where we trusted tap water, right? Whenever I went into a restaurant or I drank tap water from my own house faucet, I trusted that the tap water wasn't going to harm me, right? In fact, throughout most of the US, you can trust your tap water. In fact, most first world nations, Canada, Australia, most of Europe, you can trust to drink the tap water. If you go to a restaurant and you ask for a soft drink and they bring it out to you in the glass already poured, you trust that that's not harmful to you. And so you don't spend the time to test the water while you're sitting there. You don't go through all that, right? It's too costly for you not to be naive in that situation. On the other end of the spectrum, there are countries I've traveled to, and you probably all know them. I'm not going to mention, I don't want to, badmouth, but there are places in the world where I would never think of drinking the tap water. And I would demand that if I order a bottled soda, that they bring the bottle out and I'll open it up to make sure, I hear the vacuum seal. And even then I'll still be a little skeptical, right? So the point is, there are times when you want to go through the extra cost, right? Time, energy, money, perhaps, of being a skeptic. So this gets to, in order to increase your STEM signal at work, you need to be proven, right, through EARS that you're reliably trustworthy. And for your colleagues, your superiors, your subordinates, and your peers, you need to manage the level of prudence you assign to each one of those situations, right? If you've got somebody in the office who's constantly taking credit for your work, you want to be skeptical the next time you work with them. If you have a boss that's constantly saying yes to everything you ask for, well, okay, maybe they're not actually a good boss, right? You want to get a little pushback so that you can become better at what you do. You need the feedback in order to get better. So that's the way you use this at work. How do you trust others? Again, EARS, and then at what portion of the scale do you want to trust them? Okay? All right, that concludes today's lesson. Next week, we're going to get into the biological and hormonal roots of trustworthy, where we learn about facial trust, facial recognition in our trust, and then a couple of hormones and neurochemicals, neurotransmitters in the brain that are used to build and rebuild trust. Please like and subscribe this video if you did. And please refer to others. Again, if you've got some value on it to increase your STEM signal, you should show this to others in your network. All right, thanks for listening. This is Jeff Goldfinger with the STEM Signal, and we'll see you next week.